Good morning and happy Teach Me Tuesday. If you have been following over on my Instagram page, you know that I've been a little under the weather. So today we're getting a daytime recording because I am home from work and I do still sound a little funny. But I'm here and we have a fun Teach Me Tuesday today. To be honest, when kind of putting this slide deck together, I felt like I had a lot of ideas that I was trying to bring in together, and it didn't feel like it flowed the best, but I think as I'm talking it through, it might make a little bit more sense. So we're going to talk about the transition from intrauterine to extrauterine blood flow or circulation through the body and how the heart and the lungs are working together to make this efficient. So let's review. When you think about the in utero circulation, there are a lot of things that are going on. But what you have to remember is that there are three essential shunts that are working together to direct the blood flow in a certain way. Because what happens? In utero, the baby's lungs are not doing the primary function of what they do when you're out of the uterus, right? When you're an adult or, a term baby or a baby breathing and having regular circulation. The lungs don't have to do that work because of my best friend, the placenta. If you've watched the placenta video, you know how obsessed I am with placentas, but really the placenta is already doing all of that work. So the blood does not need to shunt in the exact same way that it does when a baby is out and taking their first breaths. So what's happening in utero is that some of those places are being bypassed. The lungs are being bypassed. Yes, some blood goes to the lungs, and we'll talk about that. The liver is being bypassed because, again, the placenta is a filtration system, not the liver. So some blood, of course, goes to the lungs. But the process of the blood flow through the lungs is very different in utero than it is outside of the uterus. So let's talk about that a little bit. In utero, we have our three ducts. So the ductus venosus is that shunt that allows oxygenated blood to go up the umbilical vein. So the vein goes from the placenta to the baby with oxygen and nutrients and all of the things that the baby needs. And it completes fetal circulation by dropping the blood into the IVC, right? The inferior vena cava. It then uses the foramen ovale, which is essentially just an ASD. It's an atrial defect, a little space between the atria, to go from the right atrium to the left atrium to allow it to bypass the lungs. So usually when we go into the right side of the heart, we need to get the blood to the lungs because we need oxygen. But because of our beautiful placenta, we already have the oxygen. So instead, we're going to go ahead and bypass that and get the blood just going to the left side of the heart so that we can then pump it on out. Then we have our ductus arteriosus, which is the most common thing we NICU nurses know, right? We call it a PDA, but in utero it's just a ductus arteriosus. It's supposed to be patent in utero. So we're bypassing the lungs because we don't need that much circulation. And then we connect the aorta to the pulmonary arteries to allow for some of that mixing so that there is some blood getting into the lungs. So when you think about the PDA and in utero, we want it to stay open. When after a baby's born and they're in the NICU and we want our PDAs to close and they don't close, we give the babies ibuprofen. And that is why women cannot take ibuprofen during their pregnancy, because there's a risk that they would close the ductus arteriosus prematurely in utero, and then this circulation that is required in utero would not be able to happen. So again, if you're following along on the Instagram page, you know that I said there's going to be a special slide, and that's the next slide. And I'm going to remind everyone that I am not an artist. So this is my drawing. So don't make too much fun of me. But also, if you saw my post the other day about Adam Grant and how he was talking about how sometimes the way that we learn best is when we push ourselves out of our boundary. And for me, that is kind of that drawing. I am not a great drawer, artist in any way, but drawing these things does help me. So let's look at my beautiful circuit of in utero blood flow. I know you're overwhelmed by the glory that's happening here, but let's look at what's happening. So over here would be our placenta, and we have our umbilical cord. So we're coming up our umbilical vein, and we are plopping in. We go through the ductus venosus, we bypass the liver, and we enter into the right atrium. Now, in a normal functioning heart, we would go down into the right ventricle and then we'd get over to the lungs. Some blood is going to do that. The right ventricle still does pump in utero, but it is not working as hard. So you'll see I have some blood that's saying, hey, yep, we do go over here to the lungs. But the majority of this blood is going to cross over the foramen ovale and allow the oxygenated blood, because it's already got what it needed from the placenta, aka my best friend, to go down into the left ventricle, which does the primary pump of that heart, and then go up into the aorta and distribute along the body. Now up here, you're going to see the aorta does have a connection to your pulmonary arteries, and some mixing of blood will happen here as well, and a little bit of blood will get over into your lungs. The lungs still need nutrients, they still need oxygen to grow and function in utero. But as this blood is, I always picture kind of like a railroad track, a car, like we're dropping off our oxygen, and we're going to pick up our waste. So we've dropped off our oxygen, and we've picked up some waste. The blood has now become deoxygenated, and it is going to go back into the umbilical cord via the umbilical arteries, which we have 2 of, my 2 beautiful blue lines there, and go back to the placenta, where we will drop off waste and we will pick up oxygen, and the cycle will start all over again. Again, this is in a perfectly functioning placenta, umbilical cord, heart, all of those things in utero. But what I wanted to show here in my subpar drawing is that the blood flow is just different in utero, and that is because we don't need the same functions. I hope you know that these L's are lungs. They don't even look similar, so sorry about that. But that's what's happening here. This is those 3 shunts. We have our ductus venosus, our foramen ovale, and our ductus arteriosus that allow blood to shunt in a different direction in utero. So the baby's born. Yay! So the baby's born, and we have some changes in our fetal circulation. A lot of that has to do with the pulmonary vascular resistance. In order for that to happen, is the pulmonary system just kind of has to almost like relax and allow some of this change to occur. And the right ventricle output suddenly has to get bigger so that we can get the lungs going and allow that systemic circulation to happen via the left atrium. So now we're going to have kind of our perfect adult oxygenated blood flow to all of our organs. Those are those are big things that have to happen, right? The pulmonary vascular resistance has to change. Our ducts have to start closing, our ductus venosus, our foramen ovale, and our ductus arteriosus. All 3 of those things have to happen in order for our circulation to become perfect. So afterwards, it's perfect every single time, right? If only. But here's a professional drawing of a heart where you see that the blood is again going to enter into either the SVC or the IVC and come into your right atrium. It goes down into your right ventricle, pushes out your pulmonary arteries. Remember, arteries are away, goes into your lungs, and now the lungs can do their primary function, which is to take the CO2 and give the baby oxygen. The cells, not the baby, the cells oxygen. So then we go back into the heart. The cells are now fully oxygenated. They go into the left atrium, down into the left ventricle, up the aorta, and out and delivered to the different body parts. So this is what it would look like before. After the baby, everything, the cord has been clamped, the shunts are closing and all of that. So this is a perfect, no heart defects, perfect transition, everything goes well. But we know that that doesn't usually happen to all of our babies. We have some babies that we probably don't see because they stay in the mom baby unit and they're doing great. But of the babies that come to the NICU, some of them do have issues such as persistent pulmonary hypertension. And to me, this was a hard concept to really understand until I watched a video about it, and it really helped me to understand that this is a circuit. The heart and the lungs are a circuit, and if there's a clogging in the circuit at any juncture, it is going to cause some backup, and that is what leads to persistent pulmonary hypertension. The number one reason we see it at birth especially will come from meconium aspiration, and that's because there is this clogging already happening in the alveoli that doesn't allow for this gas exchange to occur, and then you get a backup within your circuit. This can also happen with congenital heart defects, if the baby has pneumonia, or of course any delayed transition that occurs after delivery. all of these things can lead to persistent pulmonary hypertension, which we treat with inhaled nitric oxide, sildenafil, and of course high levels of oxygenation. And then of course, if any baby doesn't recover from that, they may end up on ECMO. So persistent pulmonary hypertension, when you think of it more of like, because we think of hypertension as something happening with the heart, but really it's happening at the lung level and it's backing up into the heart. So the PDA does sometimes remain open in our babies, especially in our premature babies. So it is the last to close, and if it doesn't close, it can cause pulmonary complications, such as chronic lung disease, collapsing of the alveoli, and the number one reason that it tends to not close in the NICU often has to do with fluid overload. So we want to start our babies on a low amount of fluids, like 80 mils per kilo per day. But sometimes you have a teeny tiny baby and you've got two lines to keep open, like a UA and a UV. Or you need to give them blood products. Or you need to give them LR or normal saline for a bolus for their blood pressure. So you end up giving them more fluids than intended at the beginning. And that can cause the ductus arteriosus to remain open because there is a large amount of fluid going through. High pressure ventilation, again, just like extra pressure on the lungs. Prematurity is a huge cause, and then persistent hypoxia because we're not allowing that transition to occur. So in this little video here, you can see, or picture here, the connection is for the ductus arteriosus. So we've got our normal heart and our little ductus arteriosus. So sometimes we do want our PDA to remain open. And so that is with our critical congenital heart defects. So some of the most common, this is not an exhaustive list, would be the hypoplastic left heart, coarctation, tetralogy, transposition, and here we just have a picture of transposition. So as we know, the aorta is supposed to come out of the left ventricle so that it can pump oxygenated blood to the body. But here in transposition, we've got the aorta coming out of the right ventricle, which means that it would be pumping unoxygenated blood to the body. In order for there to be mixing of the blood, we need the PDA to remain open so that there's mixing of blood and the oxygenated blood can get into the lungs or into the body, and the deoxygenated blood can get into the lungs to become oxygenated and drop off waste. So we rely on the ductus arteriosus to remain open in this situation. Same thing with hypoplastic left heart, TET, coarctation. There's a lot of them. If you think of those 3 T's, truncus, the truncus arteriosus, those are going to be the ones where they are critical and they rely on the PDA to remain open. These are the babies that you're going to want to start prostaglandins on. So prostaglandins will help that PDA remain open. Sometimes we have these ready, like the minute the baby is delivered, we get them pre-ordered from pharmacy so that within 30 minutes of the baby being born, we already have PG on board via a UVC being placed. So very important thing to keep open in some of our critical congenital heart defects. So when you think about discharge, we think about doing our CCHD screening. So of course, in a perfect world, every single woman has perfect prenatal care and lots of ultrasounds of the baby, fetal ultrasounds, where we are looking for the function of the heart. But sometimes things are missed. Sometimes someone only gets that one scanning ultrasound at 20 weeks for anatomy scan, and we don't see these. Sometimes you can't see a coarctation when the PDA is wide open in utero. So we do a CCHD screening to see if there is a problem, and it needs to happen 24 hours after birth. That's because we want to give that PDA time to close and make sure that when it closed, that it didn't cause another problem. So you're going to put an oximeter on preductally, so that means before the duct. So you want that first juncture that's coming off of your aorta that gets the blood coming straight out of the aorta. How oxygenated is that versus what's happening after the duct? So postductal, and see, are they correlating? And if they're not, it can be indicative of a baby having a critical congenital heart defect. Every hospital should have a protocol for what you do if the baby fails, and eventually they usually end up with an echo that will be your definitive diagnosis of critical congenital heart defect. So in review, the successful transition is a critical process for the newborn survival. Many babies transition and it's natural and it's seamless and everything goes great, but otherwise they need some medical support to stabilize their circulatory system and respiratory function. So thank you for putting up with my little blunders today as I am recovering from my illness. And I hope you learned something, and I hope you liked my drawing and know that you'll never see another one again. No, that's not true. Maybe we'll do another one. They're just so beautiful. I don't know what to say. Have a great day. Please comment below with any questions.